Welcome to the Fear and Courage podcast, where we tell the stories of service of military members, law enforcement officers, and first responders. These careers are intense and in many ways foreign to the majority of people. Stories with intensity, unique experience, impactful personal results, positive or negative, and lives changed for the better or worse are the primary content. By telling the impactful stories of education, training, operations, traumas, victories, career paths, and family experiences that come from service, we allow the listener to better understand the full impact of one person's choice to serve. I hope for the personal impact on those who serve to be a factor in the national conversation about decisions made regarding military deployment thresholds and national and state law enforcement and first responder policy and regulation. Thanks for joining us. Today on the show we have Majors William Denn and Patrick O'Donnell. Major William Denn commissioned into the United States Army through the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 2006. He led both tank and infantry platoons in Iraq, fighting alongside the Kurdish Peshmerga in Mosul from 2007 to 2009. In 2010, as an intelligence officer, he served as a combat advisor to the Afghan security forces in Regional Command East, Afghanistan. Following his tour in Afghanistan, Den commanded a military intelligence company working with the National Security Agency. Den completed his Master in Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School, graduated as the honor graduate of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, and completed the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies. Den is currently a planner at the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Den has written for the Washington Post, the Boston Herald, and several policy and military journals. He's a member of the Board of Directors of the Council of Emerging National Security Affairs. Major Patrick O'Donnell commissioned into the United States Army through the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 2006. After graduating from the Aviation Basic Officer Leadership Course at AH-64 Delta Apache Longbow Flight School, he served as attack helicopter platoon leader and battalion adjutant at Hunter Army Airfield, Georgia, and from 2008 to 2009 at Cop Spiker, Iraq. O'Donnell then moved with the unit to Fort Drum, New York, and served as an assistant battalion operations officer and battle captain from 2010 to 2011 at FOB Salerno, Afghanistan. Major O'Donnell deployed again to Afghanistan as an attack aviation company commander from 2013 to 2014. Major O'Donnell served as an attack company observer coach trainer at the National Training Center and most recently graduated from the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School Rotary Wing curriculum in July 2017. He is qualified as a pilot in command on the AH-64 Apache, OH-58 Kiowa, UH-72 Lakota, and UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. On this episode of the podcast, we talk about media interviews on active duty, partner capacity operations with Iraqi and Afghan forces, the decision to attend the United States Military Academy immediately after 9/11, and post-traumatic stress and moral injuries that service members carry with them forever.
Did I ever tell you about my first media experience and how Petraeus called down to my battalion commander and said, "What the hell is Lieutenant Den doing?"
So where were you?
Obviously, I haven't told this story. So I was a first lieutenant platoon leader, and we had just gotten into Mosul, and it was our first big battalion clearance campaign to draw out a shit ton of Al-Qaeda guys in one of the big neighborhoods in Mosul. And so, of course, we had all these embedded reporters. So we had a USA Today journalist embedded with my platoon, and it was like a 72-hour mission that we were doing straight.
And you were a first lieutenant?
Platoon leader, yeah.
Platoon leader, first deployment.
Yep. So my platoon was we actually had 2 tank sections and 2 infantry squads in the platoon. We were kind of this hybrid experiment that we were doing. So I had about 30 guys in it. And so the night before the mission, it was about 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. and we're doing all our pre-mission rehearsals, getting ready. And we had planned to, I think, hit about maybe 7 or 8 targets in the neighborhood. So these were known Al-Qaeda leadership locations. And that night, we started getting intelligence that the Al-Qaeda guys knew that we were coming. And so they were already squirting off the objectives and moving to different safe houses. And so I was just briefing my platoon, and I said, "Hey, we've got some intelligence that the enemy knows we're coming. Just be prepared. That I know that we had rehearsed these 7 targets, but we may have to go to other places that we hadn't rehearsed. I don't know how they found out. It may have been the Iraqi army. It may have been the Iraqi police. It may have been our own interpreters. Point being, they know, and just be prepared to be adaptable tonight.
And to clarify for someone listening to this, the squirters off the objective is people running off the backside of the objective to try and run away and find someplace safe.
Right? Yeah. Escape these our mission to go in there that night.
It's a very colorful term.
And so the next morning, the USA Today reporter ends up submitting his story about this big mission we're doing, and he quotes me. Lieutenant Den says the Iraqi army tipped off Al Qaeda that the U.S. was going to come do that mission.
I'm assuming he didn't run that quote by you.
He did
ahead
not.
of time.
He did not. He did not clear that quote. And so I get. After the mission, a few days later, I get called to my battalion commander's office, and lieutenant colonel, and he is livid. He's like, Lieutenant Den, I just got a call from General Petraeus
Oh, God.
down in Baghdad, and he wants
Small potatoes here.
and he wants to know why Nouri al-Maliki is yelling at him about this Lieutenant Den who's saying the Iraqi army is not a reliable partner.
That's unbelievable.
And so I said, sir, first of all, that is not what I said. And second, I quickly learned that was my first big lesson with dealing with the media or dealing with interviews, that you have to be very, very careful about what you say, because everything is potentially on the record, and it always helps to get a transcript of or an initial idea of what the story is going to be afterwards.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty important in that instance. You're nearly responsible for an international incident in an active combat zone. Mm-hmm. And what year was that?
That was 2008.
So
early 2008.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that could get a little dangerous for keeping your position as a platoon leader at that point, I think. Yeah, I think I've done I did one interview in combat. Mm-hmm. And it was about partnered forces. Mm-hmm. And I think experience is varied greatly in partner force. I don't know, the capabilities, it just your general experience working with either the Iraqi army or the Afghan National Army or Afghan National Police.
But I mean that was our habitual frustration, like dealing with the Iraqi army and later on in Afghanistan. It's just
What were the rules of engagement like for you specifically in Iraq? Because it varied based on time, based on year, based on theater, based on the political environment in some cases. But specifically with a partnered force, were you required to take them with you?
So that was part of the strategy at the time, is that really it was this idea that we wanted to basically train the Iraqis so that we wouldn't have a job in the future, right? That was the U.S. strategy, is that you want to develop host nation capabilities within the Iraqi army, the Iraqi police, and also later on in Afghanistan, so that they were capable of assuming their own security. So there wasn't really an ability to do that if you never took them on patrol,
sure,
right? To help train them, help test them, help them develop their tactics, help push their own intelligence collection mechanisms. There's a lot of things that we would do to continue to build their capabilities. And this was still during the surge at the time, and it was interesting because there was always this frustration. You saw it with a lot of lieutenants and NCOs at the time, where oftentimes they didn't want to partner with the Iraqi army because they just weren't at a level of competency at the time, and depending on where you were at. So it was oftentimes frustrating to bring them along, in addition to some of the issues that we just talked about, how sometimes there would be, leaks, to the enemy. But at the end of the day, we weren't going to be able to leave unless they really developed their capabilities. So I made sure that it was, a priority of mine that every single patrol that we went on, we had at least some partnered forces. And I could really see that the Iraqis appreciated that. The ones that I worked with, oftentimes they gave feedback to our commanders that, my platoon, they really appreciated that every time we would go partner with them, whereas that wasn't always the case with other platoons that would go out in sector that sometimes saw them as a liability and wouldn't really want to do joint missions with them.
So you never had a situation when you were an armor officer where it was mandatory for partner force on every patrol?
It was highly encouraged, but
Okay.
it wasn't necessarily mandatory.
Yeah, later on, especially for any unit doing ground patrols, it became part of the standard operating procedure, and there were no patrols allowed without a partner force. And that we saw some significant green on blue incidences in Afghanistan, and there were some of them in Iraq, but I'm not particularly familiar with how often that happened.
It was also difficult depending on who you were working with. So depending on the Iraqi battalion, or especially Iraqi police, they actually didn't want to go do patrols. They were very much in the mindset that their role in security was manning checkpoints and just doing kind of very static operations, whereas we really wanted to be a little bit more aggressive, to get out there, use actionable intelligence to go after some of the Al-Qaeda leadership. But many times the Iraqi army units that we were working with didn't want to do that. Now the Kurdish Peshmerga were a completely different animal. Those guys were very aggressive, very willing to go on patrols, to go after intelligence targets and whatnot. So that was always a big difference that I noticed whenever we partnered with them.
What do you think the reason for that major difference? I mean, there are obviously cultural differences between the Kurdish Peshmerga and the rest of Iraq, but what do you think made them so fired up as a partner force compared to Iraqi police or Iraqi army or other elements?
Well, the Kurdish Peshmerga just has a long history of training and having their own unique identity, and being a well-trained military force, whereas many of these Iraqi units at the time, these were draftees, and these were newly trained battalions that were starting to be put together. Many times those units were brought in from other locations in Iraq. So you say you had a Iraqi army battalion from the Baghdad area, or Shia areas in the south, and suddenly they're up in the northern cities of Mosul. They're not.
No personal investment in
they don't have an investment in the area. They don't necessarily care. It's not necessarily their hometowns. Whereas the Kurdish, they were from that area.
So the Kurds were posted specifically in their own areas. They weren't moved around, or
for the most part. And then there's also many other political aspects to it, where the Kurdish, have traditionally wanted to take northern Iraq for themselves, and so that was part of the aspect, in that they really wanted to expel many of these enemy cells out of the area, and kind of take kind of political control of that area.
You know what I'm interested in? I want to know if OD had any partnered force experiences, because I personally saw the Afghan National Army UH-60 Blackhawks, and I saw them take off and fly. And from what I saw in the folks that I talked to in Afghanistan at the time, they were used almost exclusively to show off and move VIPs around inside of Kabul. Not on any operations that I ever heard of, but what does the aviation partner force landscape look like?
Aviation, obviously, I mean, we're a pretty unique animal. I mean, everybody likes to think they're, unique and special, but in aviation, we know it. So, I mean, that's something that obviously we didn't have some of the challenges like Will was referencing. As far as partnered operations, very, very, very limited. I can only really recall one instance, and this was actually in Afghanistan. We were operating with a couple utility aircraft out of Kabul. We were, that's kind of the cell of their Afghan Air Forces. And we flew down one day. We kind of got a Frago retasking us to go provide some support to move into a part of the country where the the Afghan National Army had not really had a presence in a long time. So really the intel situation on the ground was pretty uncertain. And for the Afghans to commit helicopters to go push into that area, even though, as much as like a routine mission to assess the local district, for them to utilize helicopters and utilize their own was a pretty significant event. And obviously, like Will mentioned, the building that partner capacity was really key to our mission. I think as an officer that it's important to kind of know those levels a couple above you, so that, decisions that you make in the moment do have consequences for the overall mission. Kind of considering that in your decision making is important. So in our case, as an aviation unit, hey, we're going to push you and your 2 Apaches. I want you to fly down to Kabul, link in with a couple Afghan helicopters. They're on this part of the ramp. Go land, hop out, do a quick run through on the logistics of the operation for sequencing and timing on how that will work, and then go execute the mission.
Did you fly with Afghan pilots in the air at the same time as you?
Oh, of course, yes. So they were really as a attack platform. I think in this instance, we were communicating. Their pilots, English is the international language of aviation, and even from the moment that we landed, shut down, talked to these pilots, they're competent professional pilots. Some trained probably in the United States on their aircraft, and well versed in their mission set. Smart, intelligent guys, good command of the English language. We communicated. We talked through the aspects of our mission that were of concern. We shared a frequency that we would utilize for the inter-flight deconfliction as we're out flying around, and so we more or less set our plan for the mission. So we had to go depart. We were flying down to the south. We were conducting. We're each going to get refuel. American aircraft at an American base and Afghan aircraft at the Afghan base. We both get our refuel and then push out further into the outskirts to check on this district center. And fortunately, the aspect of the mission that we were coordinating with, everything went smooth. We got them to our link-up point, but at that point, unfortunately, we were retasked for another mission set. We were pushed off to go respond to some forces in contact. But fortunately, we were able to relay to the guys as they were on their short final for landing for their refuel that our commanders had retasked us to an alternate mission set. But I think even that brief moment of talking through the mission set, flying Apaches in lead formation, the lift aircraft, of course, following behind us, that there was some benefit gained for both parties. Us and the confidence of the Afghan Air Force to fly and conduct helicopter missions, and I think them that we were willing to support them in their missions too. So even though the ultimate, hey, go into this district center, check in on it, provide that overwatch for the air assault sequence as they move their ANA Afghan National Army forces on the ground to check on the district center. We didn't get to see that to fruition. We got a chance to execute the team building aspect of it. But that was, that's over multiple deployments. That's really the only instance of partner mission ever taking place. Well, there's from an air-to-air perspective.
There's two points of that I think are pretty interesting, and I don't think most people realize happen. Is that number one, the variability from Afghan National Army or Air Force pilot to all the way down to Afghan National Army infantry soldier. Across the board, in my experience, I never saw a young Afghan National Army infantry soldier who could read.
Yeah,
Didn't see it.
That's very true. I think that we benefited in aviation. Highly educated guys, command of the English language. These well-educated guys and competent.
And not to say that the Afghan National Army, young infantry soldiers or lowest ranking soldiers are are bad or not fit for the job, but there's a significant difference in some of these partner force capabilities from the most technically competent to the lowest level soldier in the United States Army. That I think that gap is significantly smaller.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in Afghanistan in 2010. I often had friends ask me, why are we still there? 9 years later, and we're still there now in 2018. But it's this idea that building a modern army is so incredibly difficult and takes so much time, especially when you have conditions there where in 2001, when we went in, 90% of the country was illiterate, couldn't read, and that it gradually improved, but still, I wouldn't be surprised if the literacy rate is still quite low, where you still maybe have over 60% of the country that can't read. I haven't looked at the recent statistics, but when then you're talking about conducting and training a modern military, how do you do simple things like write an operations order and disseminate that to the troops when in a company of 100 guys, maybe the only guy that really knows how to read at an elementary school level is the company commander, a captain, right? Or how do you do a modern, finance system where you're paying everybody when people can't even sign their names, right? Like these are all really, simple challenges that we don't really think about that become exponentially difficult problems in the context of building, a military in Afghanistan.
It's not just teaching them that technical job.
It isn't. And I remember, observing some of the basic training. So we had a whole mission set about training the infantry soldiers in Afghanistan. And literally the first 1 to 2 months was just spent teaching guys to, basic hygiene, about wearing deodorant, using Western toilets, how to sign their name, simple things like that. An incredible amount of effort. And then, on top of that, you're trying to teach graduate level strategy and operations, and it becomes an almost impossible task. And really, we invested so much time and effort into that. But that's kind of the indicators and vignettes that I would tell my friends, saying this is why we're still there, 15 years later, still trying to build this military.
I think if pop culture has taught us anything, you look at recent, documentaries like Top Gun. You can just see pilots are funnier, better looking, more intelligent.
Cited Top Gun as a documentary.
We treat it as such.
And it's a recent documentary.
A recent documentary.
All right. Yeah. Maybe we could point to a few better examples. But
what was the Brad Pitt Netflix documentary that just came out? War, was it?
Brad Pitt,
he played
tank?
He played McChrystal in it.
It was set as a dark comedy.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not sure,
it's not. Anyways, but it's a dark comedy, but what I think a lot of veterans that watched that next Netflix movie really appreciated was just that feeling of frustration about just how comical it could be, every day trying to train a modern army when, the majority of the soldiers couldn't read and things like that.
And there's one video that's out there that I think in about 20 seconds, it's hilarious and it's almost as tragic as it is funny, where a U.S. Army unit is in Iraq attempting to do some physical training with an Iraqi Army or Iraqi police unit. I can't remember which one it is. And they're trying to do 4-count jumping jacks. Basic Army 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 4-count jumping jacks. And it looks like they immediately all go into uncontrolled spasms.
Yeah, but the thing like that, we laugh when we watch those videos, but I think the tendency is to be like, oh well, they're not smart, right? And that's how they had so much trouble. But the reality is the jumping jack is kind of a Western military concept, anyways.
I believe we have a technical term for that called the side straddle hop,
which I think it could be questioned about how much does that actually affect military readiness, right? Especially when you're trying to teach people that have never done that. And we grew up doing jumping jacks in elementary school.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's fair.
They never did that, and it's trying to teach them a new skill, right? It's just it's gonna be difficult. But what I saw though with the Iraqis and the Afghans is that they're actually incredibly smart smart group of people, right? Like I could never do what I saw insurgents do about like electrical engineering and mechanical engineering and building bombs literally out of like a toolbox of parts, right? Like I couldn't do that. They are actually well adept about being able to build improvised explosive devices. I had one time where I was doing a nighttime patrol, and this explosion went off right by my vehicle. We were looking around and couldn't figure it out. Well, later on we found out that someone had put some C4 explosives on an RC car and driven it underneath my vehicle and exploded. This was way before even Call of Duty put that in a video game. I was one of the first people that actually tactic happened to. You know,
that's great.
This was in 2007, 2008 that happened. And, you know, again, like who comes up with this stuff? Very smart insurgents, very smart people in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I have a lot of respect might not be the word, but respect for the enemy, or just like appreciation for the talents, adaptation, ingenuity that they brought to the battlefield.
I mean, you have to know your enemy. You have to know how you try and diagnose how they think, how they, what's important to them, how they develop their next tactic that's trying to influence your behavior. I mean, that's just natural.
And there's some cultural aspects too. Going back to the hilarious jumping jack video, if you've ever been around someone in Afghanistan and walked up a hill with them, there's an entirely different level of fitness there. I personally was just smoked up a hill by a 12-year-old blind Afghan, walking up a hill with rocks in his way up a really, really difficult technical trail.
Mike, that's not hard to do, to smoke you.
Maybe not. Maybe not. That may be an issue with my own fitness, but this 12-year-old had some unbelievable ability to walk up hills, like every single Afghan that you ever came across that was from that area. So there's some differing cultural standards.
Flip flops too.
They absolutely did it all in flip flops.
Yeah.
So I mean, but the cultural differences in the military, I think, probably led to a lot of planning difficulties, a lot of misunderstandings with how the United States operates militarily,
you know what? And
versus how they culturally operate.
The single biggest thing that I took away from my time being partnered with both Iraqis and Afghans is that at the end of the day, if we want to leave those countries, you have to find sustainable solutions for them. You have to realize that culturally, historically, they come from a different position, and you need to adapt, solutions that works within their system. I remember in Afghanistan, I was an intelligence officer at the time, and I was working with a bunch of Afghan intelligence officers, trying to teach them about pattern analysis, and we, the U.S. Army had just fielded them all these new computers, and so like we were trying to teach them how to use Excel and do complex analysis, and at the end of the day, this one Afghan lieutenant colonel took me aside and he said, "Captain Den," he's like, and he pointed out the window. He said, "See that mountain out there?" I said, "Yeah, I see the mountain." He's like, "Do you know what I was doing, 10 years before you guys got here?" I said, "No, what were you doing?" He's like, "I was leading my donkey up that mountain." And then he said to me, "You know what I'm going to be doing after you leave?" I said, "What are you going to be doing?" And he said, "I'm going to be leading my donkey back up that mountain." And the point that he was trying to make was, as he's like pointing at all these computers that we had fielded him and these complex headquarters and the networks and bringing in the internet, is that at the end of the day, these were not sustainable solutions. There's an Afghan way to be able to do these things, right? And it hit me that it was kind of ludicrous, right? That I'm teaching Microsoft Excel to this headquarters of guys that half couldn't read, right? It didn't make any sense, right? And like after we left, what was the likelihood that the money was going to be there to sustain contracts for fuel to be brought into these headquarters to provide power generation for this computer network that we put? It was crazy. It was crazy. So really embracing this idea that it may not be the most efficient way. It may not be the way that we would do it in the U.S. Army. But like if they want to use like a ledger and just like manually write down things, like if that's sustainable for them and they're going to continue doing that, that's the right answer, right? If they are able to do their physical fitness program without doing jumping jacks, like that's okay. You know, that's not the U.S. Army way. Like we love jumping jacks, but like the Afghans will the Afghans will be okay, right? And so, and really trying to take a step back and say, I know this is how we would do it, but if that's not sustainable, that's not the right answer for them. And being able to tailor our training for that. And that's really hard for us to do because we are also indoctrinated and trained in our own methodologies, and we think we're the best, but our methods are not the best for Afghans and Iraqis, right, because they're not sustainable. So that was one of my big, kind of lessons learned, light bulbs that went off during my time over there.
We started the show with some discussion about a media event gone wrong, as well as some experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we're going to jump back a little bit to the beginning of Major Den and Major O'Donnell's careers, and we'll talk about their decision to join the military, to go to West Point, the school that they chose to go to, and some things that resulted in their careers from that. What took Patrick O'Donnell, the high schooler, to West Point?
I definitely I come from a military heritage in my family, from grandfathers who fought in World War II, uncles in Vietnam, my father who was a Marine, my brother who preceded me as an Air Force officer at the Air Force Academy. So it was always one of those things that I had considered an option. And I think what really drove me as a high school senior was when we were attacked on September 11th. And I specifically remember being in high school and processing that, trying to understand how that was drastically going to change my worldview and the world that I was about to enter into as an 18-year-old adult. And at that point, I considered college to be something that I needed to do. I needed to invest that time in to have an education to better myself. But I also felt that calling to serve. And for me, I think in that aftermath, I decided I wanted to serve in some capacity. Now, what ultimately drove me to West Point, kind of a happy set of circumstances. Really, I looked at all the academies. I had considered all the ROTC programs, and I remember doing a couple college visits. Obviously, the application procedure, the nomination process with your congressional representative, that's something you need to get started well in your mid high school years.
So explain that a little bit. The difference specifically between applying to, you're from right outside of Atlanta and Peachtree City. So applying to an obvious opportunity at Georgia Tech is a really great school. It's close, and that was obviously on your mind, I would assume, or Auburn or Alabama or UGA, any of these schools that are around you that are state schools, that are good schools. Obviously, the decision to go to West Point versus one of those is a factor, but what's the difference in actually getting there?
Well, I mean, West Point, the application process has a lot of similarities to the civilian application process, where you apply directly to that university, or in our case, the U.S. Military Academy. But what is also required for admission into one of the academies is to pursue a congressional nomination, whether that's through your House of Representatives, representative of your district, or a select number of nominations that are available for your state senators.
Vice president, I think, has a few. Vice
president, some more of the specifics there. I'm not exactly sure of how many per district or congressman. So, in addition to doing that application to West Point or to the military academy, you're also running that parallel application process with your congressional representatives. So that was just one of those things that, for me, I had the benefit of an older brother who had run through that application process, who had been successfully, accepted and admitted into an academy, and that allowed, I knew what I had to do, and thankfully. And I think we see a lot that family ties to the military and ties to the academy in general. The process is not difficult to know, but it helps if you know someone, whether it's a family friend who has gone through the process, so kind of some of the ins and outs that the common person might not know when you think about a normal college application procedure.
And a lot of, as a sort of an aside, there's a big trend among people in the military for their kids and relatives to go kind of join the family business. You have quite the West Point history building in your family, Will.
Well, since me, so I'm the oldest of four boys, and so three of us, the oldest three, have gone to West Point now. But I think that was that was a legacy that kind of started after me, because really I didn't have much military experience.
So what led to your decision to go with no military experience?
Yeah, so my grandfather was a World War II vet that fought in Battle of the Bulge in Europe. But like many World War II vets, they were very stoic, and I really didn't hear very many war stories from my grandfather. So I didn't really know what it was like to be in the military. But in high school, being the oldest of four boys, my parents were pretty clear to me that they didn't have any money to pay for college, so I had to figure that out myself. So I kept in the back of my mind the military academy. Growing up in New York, people knew about West Point, and so I kept it in the back of my mind as an option, mostly for the funding aspects, since everybody that goes there gets a full ride. But very much like OD, my senior year of high school, September 11 happened, and that instantly changed everything. I had applied to many other schools in the Northeast, but at that point, I kind of knew that I wanted to do something to give back, and especially growing up in New York, that was important to me. And then also, really interestingly, so I had applied for early admission to West Point, and I had actually received my acceptance letter on September 13th, 2001.
Wow!
And so, it was 2 days later after September 11, I get this letter in the mail from West Point saying you've been accepted. I was like, holy crap! The universe is trying to tell me something. So I had made up my mind at that point. That I was going to go, and so kind of my focus at that point was just preparing, learning as much as I could, and just getting in the best shape that I could in order to enter the academy.
And I was just to kind of piggyback off that. I was conflicted. I knew I wanted to serve in some capacity, but I looked at ROTC options. I looked at a broad range of schools. I looked at home state schools, like you mentioned there, and but I think what drove me and solidified me going to West Point, it wasn't until the spring of 2002 on some college visitation was I got to go do the overnight program.
West Point does a visitor program where it's not just a visit and tour of the campus, because the experience the experience is so unique, and they want you to actually see what being a freshman there is like a little bit more, because it's not like anywhere else. And so what they do is they bring upcoming possible cadets or candidates into the school. They pair you with a plebe or freshman, and so you're paired with a plebe, and you spend a full day with them. You go to classes with them. You spend the night in their cadet room. You go to drill and watch them drill. You go to intramurals with them. It's the full experience. And so we'll pick back up with high schooler Patrick O'Donnell on his trip to West Point for this 24-hour visit.
All right, so there we are, spring 2002, signing in, and get paired up with a like Michael mentioned, a cadet, freshman plebe cadet. And I think there were two of us lucky enough to get paired together for this visit. And I think looking back, I believe we both had a little bit more hair on that occasion.
A little bit more, possibly.
Yeah, high levels of idealism, obviously. And there we are. We're going through this process, and the biggest thing biggest impactful event of that was, okay, West Point, pretty cool, interesting process. But man, there's this kid from Augusta, fellow Georgian, just like me. This dude, he loves soccer. couldn't stop talking about his soccer team there in Augusta. And I remember just laughing to myself, like, he seems pretty sold. I bet I'll see him at West Point someday. And little did we know, I don't think we even realized this until maybe a year.
2 years later.
Yeah, 2 years into our friendship, where we finally were able to put two and two together there. But we paired together for the overnight experience. And
what I think the plebe that we followed around, he asked us a few questions about why we were interested in the Army and what we were interested in doing, and my mind at that point, I think, was already made up. But
oh yeah, I mean, this guy, I think, even as an 18-year-old, was all about the infantry. Like, just absolutely wanted to do that. I think for me, even throughout my time there at West Point, I didn't really have that exact. This is what I'm gonna do. I kind of, and how the Army has been for me thus far is. You kind of dabble in a few things, get the information that you can, get your feet wet, see how much you like it, and then, continue on from there. And for me, that's led to a pretty outstanding career that wouldn't have been possible had it not been for West Point and the educational opportunities that presented itself.
Yeah, there's some unique aspects of the school there. And, one of the things that I think anyone can recognize is that when 100% of the student body is going to commission as an active duty officer in the Army, and at the time we were there and still now, all of those people are commissioning into an Army at war. Yeah. I think there's a little bit more of a focused environment on what the task at hand or what the task at hand will be in the future.
It's also, I found it really interesting years later. For our generation, we were all obviously impacted by September 11. But I quickly realized how these moments in our national history that compel a generation to go do something are actually very fleeting. So I remember as a company commander, so as a captain, this was maybe 7-8 years later after graduation, so 2011 or 12 time frame. So I was as an intelligence officer, I was working for the NSA at the time, and I was commanding about 100 soldiers that were all intel soldiers. And I was giving an award for some guys that had been involved contributing to the intelligence for the Osama bin Laden raid. And so I was presenting them the certificate from the Director of National Intelligence, and I was talking about, I was giving a speech to all my soldiers in my company about how much September 11 had influenced me and how this was this, critical moment of my life that kind of brought me down this path to where I'm at today, and how, I'm so proud of these soldiers that helped, ultimately bring Osama bin Laden to justice. And then afterwards, I remember talking to a few of my younger soldiers, and I said, hey guys, what'd you think about what I was talking about? And they said, sir, I was 5 years old when when September 11th happened. That doesn't really mean anything to me, right? And now we're at a point, in 2018 where we have soldiers joining the Army that were born after September 11. So it's just I thought that was rather interesting about how these moments of history can be such a critical event in our lives that change everything for us and kind of bring us down these lives paths. But within several years afterwards, in a very short amount of time, how our national memory is actually very short and fleeting, and that it doesn't really have that impact that it had on our generation for this current group of soldiers and officers coming into West Point or joining the military.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I don't think we can go down the path of motivations to join the military, but it's a diverse group of reasons.
And that is not saying anything bad about people's current motivations to join the military at all. All I'm just saying is that people's reasons for joining the military very quickly, they're very different, and they change, and over time,
you talked about it being a fleeting event, but I think you look at us and the shared experience that we all had, going through that, and kind of what a unifying power that also had for us, and what we knew, A, what we were getting into, B, that we would be asked to lead and serve under under tough circumstances.
Yeah.
And I think if
and
anything,
I think
that strengthened our bonds of friendship.
It certainly did, and it actually I feel like it sustained me during those like many years that were really terrible in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like at the end of the day, like coming back to like why did I join the military, and like I feel like I'm still doing something important for our country.
Well, that's definitely a valid point to make, is that on deployments in an operational capacity, what you're doing in the moment a lot of times sure does not feel like it is a direct operational derivative of a 9/11 response. Mm-hmm. It's deviated so far from that initial response that it's good to keep those original motivations in mind as kind of a guide to help ground your decision making.
That's the strength of our officer corps, though, too. That we swear allegiance to the Constitution and the implications of that.
Yeah.
I think that's a powerful piece of.
Yeah, we didn't swear allegiance to avenge 9/11. It's a little bit different than that, but so not to gloss over an entire West Point experience, but every single student commissioning into the military, and all of the branches of the Army and all of the job opportunities in the Army, my decision was to branch infantry. And Will, you had a bit of a unique, I guess not unique, but a different choice than to branch straight into one branch of the Army and decide to stay there.
Yeah, so I did a program called branch detailing, and I to make it a quick explanation of it, is that each kind of profession in the Army, whether that's the infantry or armor, which is tanks, or aviation or intelligence, there's a different need for a certain number of officers. So your combat arms units tend to have a huge need for lots of lieutenants because there's lots of combat platoons out there. But then your other jobs, like military intelligence, for example, doesn't really have a huge need for lieutenants, but they have a lot of jobs for captains and majors. So there's this natural relationship that can happen where there's programs called branch detailing where they allow officers to kind of do the combat jobs early on in their careers, and then once they get promoted to captain in the middle of their career, they can go do jobs like military intelligence. So that's exactly what I did. I remember when I was at West Point, our sophomore year, we got an opportunity to go down to Fort Knox, Kentucky, which was the home of the Armor Corps, so all our tanks, for a couple weeks. And I remember in our training being a tank commander and being in these epic tank battles where we had lasers equipped on our tanks, and I was in this defense, and an entire tank company was coming after me, and all the other 3 tanks in my platoon had been wiped out, but my single tank was able to hold our ground, and we ended up like wiping out an entire company attack. It was
sign of great potential.
It was amazing, and I was like, I am sold. I want to be a tank commander.
It's also effectively laser tag with M1 Abrams tanks.
That's right, 70-ton beasts. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. But then I also recognized that there were other things I wanted to do in my career, and military intelligence was definitely one of them. West Point, for better or for worse, does a good and bad job of making people that go MI think they're going to be James Bond in the future. So there was an appeal to that as a young, 19, 20-year-old cadet.
Sure.
So that was kind of the career decision that I made, that I was going to go be a tank commander, an armor officer for a few years, and then eventually switch over to intelligence.
So, OD, going aviation, obviously there is an appeal to being a pilot, but your aircraft, your airframe that you were assigned is the AH-64 Apache, which most people will recognize as the preeminent flying death machine in the United States military inventory. So explain, we're gonna jump right to what is it like to fly an AH-64 Apache?
Man, strapping in those seatbelts. I mean, you really just buckle.
It starts with buckling the seatbelt.
You buckle in 10 tons of sex appeal onto your body. And
so at flight school, how do they pick what aircraft you get?
So you go through the initial call it primary flight training, where you're training on the Army's training fleet of aircraft. These are non-tactical aircraft. They're not the Black Hawks. They're not the Chinooks. They're not the Apaches. They're more or less, we want to give you something cheap so we can get out there and learn the basics.
In case you crash it?
I mean, you do a lot of you do emergency procedure training and everything else, so you know how the aircraft, how to get it on the ground safely if you lost an engine or you had to land without engine power, if you lost a tail rotor, all these emergency contingencies that any pilot, whether you're civilian or military, is going to go through. We start out doing all these basic trainers. It's like a fixed wing pilot. An airline pilot doesn't get the keys to a 777 Boeing aircraft. Most of the time they start out in a Cessna 172 because that's what guys hop in and do. So anyways, you go through that initial flight training. You do an instrument portion, and you do a basic kind of tactical employment of the aircraft, where you do map reading, you do route planning, you do some basic military skill that's going to be applicable in your future career. And throughout all these, throughout flight school, you're being evaluated, you're being graded on your flight performance for the day, you're getting graded on the academic subjects that you cover throughout that period of flight training. And so ultimately, they build an order of merit list where everyone in the class, whether you're within the the commissioned officer field, everyone's a rack and stacked, and you go and you at the end of that first little phase of flight training, they put you in a big room. They give you the list of aircraft. Okay, we got a couple Apaches, we got 4 Black Hawks, we got 2 Chinooks. All right, pass it over to the number one. What do you want to fly?
So what number were you?
I think I was number 2 in my class, which was it was great. I had an opportunity to pick any of the aircrafts, but I really wasn't sold on the Apache initially. I was engaged at the time to my lovely wife, and really the key decision maker on picking Apaches was the fact that there was going to be about a 6-week break period. So for me, that meant that honeymoon investment that I'd already put into Belize, I was going to be able to take that trip. There's definite appeal to all the different airframes in the Army, but I looked at the Apache as a mission that I could really enjoy, as an aircraft that was going to be impactful, and as one of the more technologically advanced aircraft in our fleet, one that was going to have longevity. So for me, that was what drove me to select the Apache. And looking back, I honestly can't think of any other set of circumstances producing such a just happy outcome for me professionally.
So with the Apache, there's 2 seats in the aircraft.
Yep, there's a 2-seat aircraft. You have the co-pilot gunner, which is going to sit in the front seat of the aircraft, and that's normally what you start out in your initial training. You master the sensor, the sight, the target designation equipment in the aircraft that controls the weapon system. So for weapons on the aircraft, equipped with Hellfire missiles, 2.75-inch Hydra rockets, and then an articulating 30-millimeter chain gun. So kind of a big machine gun that hangs out under the nose, rattles the whole aircraft when it shoots. Talk about giving you a rush. That pulling the trigger for the first time and feeling that whole aircraft shake and sending some lead down range was really a transformative experience in my youth.
Yeah, there's formative experiences in all military careers, I think, but the first time you pull the trigger on a 30-millimeter cannon, that's, what is it?
It's basically sitting right underneath your seat.
18 inches under your seat.
Yeah, I mean you're feeling every single bit of those vibrations, and a helicopter has a lot of vibrations as it is. But man, talk about power, and validation for every decision you had made up to that point in your life.
Is this podcast going to be PG-13 after?
I won't get into anything else related to that first trigger pull.
Well, the good news is that one of the tenets of this podcast is it's the real human. So yeah, you can be honest about the exhilarating feeling of firing a 30 millimeter cannon out of an Apache helicopter.
Yeah. So that flight training with the Apache, it goes through a full. You learn to fly at daytime. You learn to do, you take off and land, the basics, the simplicity. And then like a lot of what you did in the trainer aircraft, you learn your emergency procedures. You learn how to respond if you lose an engine while you're in a hover. You learn how to land on sloping or uneven terrain. Nothing near as cool as, like I said, firing that 30 millimeter or getting to shoot rockets.
So from the perspective of someone who, the vast majority of people have never seen an Apache in person, but they've been to air shows and they've seen, and most people, particularly for me, but most people I would think that go to air shows and enjoy, seeing aircraft in action, it never really gets old.
And I'll tell you, flying it, there's been some periods where things have been, dull, boring. You're in the aircraft for long periods. Upwards of 8 hours at a time, maybe getting out to go use the restroom once or twice over that period. But really, your Fitbit would be going off because you were just sitting there sweating underneath body armor and flight gear, employing your aircraft in theater.
So how do you use it? If you're in flight, how do you use the bathroom?
Well, there's a wide range of products developed by the Department of Defense, which are really aids to this. One being a gel pack. So imagine, I'm not going to actually ruin Jell-O for myself, because everybody loves Jell-O. Anyways, so probably the most important thing anyone wants to know is, how do you go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
And there's really a couple options. You use the bags, which either have a sponge or a procedure to turn liquid into solid, or you have Gatorade bottles. And it's always helpful to go with
Gatorade bottles is number one. So what if you have to go number two? And
that is never something I ever experienced in flight.
That's when you land at the FARP.
Get out. You run out of gas.
When you gotta go, man.
Yeah, but not always the case.
The many challenges of being a in combat.
Well,
Apache
for
pilot.
example, some specialized aircraft, you take the seat cushion off and there's a toilet in there.
We can cut this part out.
Is that the case in the Apache? Do you have a dual toilet seat?
They have some, they call them evacuation hoses. They're never meant for solid. They're never meant for dropping bombs on enemy terrain.
This is what people want to know, though, right?
It's the practical things that get the job done in combat. You can't just land every time you have to piss when you're in a firefight or when you're on your way to a firefight. From my personal experience, many, many times in firefights, you get Apaches or in that environment what's called an attack weapons team, and you hear that they're coming. And it might be one of the best feelings in the world for somebody on the ground. So I'm sure you got mentioned earlier, retasking or you get your next mission or follow-on mission or whatever that is. A lot of the time, that's people on the ground in trouble.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest kind of unforeseen things that I miss in combat. I think each of us has experiences here that. Being at war, being in combat, has its challenges. But on the same token, it has a lot of things that you love. You love to do. You love to feel like you're that adrenaline rush that you get when you're got your engines at max capacity and you got a grid, you got a group of Americans in trouble, and you're rushing to get there as soon as you can. That shot of adrenaline is unlike anything that I think I could probably find in the civilian world, but feeling that you're moving to an area to protect Americans, to potentially save lives, that was that was one of the pieces that really drove me to pick that Apache in the first place, knowing that I could make that impact. So you mentioned the feeling from the guys on the ground. That's the only thing. Being an attack aircraft, you want to make a contribution. So whether that's checking out roads to try and find people in placing IEDs, whether that's protecting our major bases and population areas to prevent people from shooting indirect fire, rockets, mortars at our concentration of forces, or a unit outside the wire, conducting their combat patrols and having that opportunity to be a set of eyes in the sky, with vicious and delicious on either side of the aircraft in case anything bad pops up. That was really an amazing feeling, and something that was my favorite part of the job, hands down.
Yeah, something it seems like a pretty unbelievable position of power as an aviator above the battlefield. What kind of risks do aviators face in combat? Obviously helicopters have been shot down, but from the Apache pilot's perspective, is there engagement with the enemy that goes in two directions?
Of course. I think you can talk to a lot of Apache pilots who've served in these last 15 years of war plus. And a lot of their tactics have been refined to try and either gain standoff from enemy, to improve our weapons sensors so that we're able to see further and better. But sometimes, and like I'm sure you experienced and will as well, the enemy has a vote in a lot of activity. And sometimes that requires you to put your aircraft, or if you need to influence that fight, you take whatever means necessary to protect your brothers on the ground. And small arms, AK-47 fire, machine gun fire, tracer fire. Of course, you get to see the breadth of that, day or night. Thankfully, I can report with great certainty that the Apache has a lot of ability to take a hit and keep on doing its job. And ultimately, for me at least, not see any effect until after everything's shut down and you're looking over the aircraft before you put it to bed.
Imagine that's a pretty unbelievable feeling, looking over your aircraft after a day of pretty intense activity and realizing there's holes in my helicopter.
Like anything, I think there's combat gives that false feeling of invincibility, and it's very apparent when you're flying. When you can climb and descend and dive and shoot and bank and turn and maneuver across the ground. But
there's some reinforcing of that feeling of invincibility.
Yeah,
when
a
you're
lot
flying
of
in a death
things
machine.
are a factor of chance, and you can have the most technologically equipped aircraft in the world with the ability to communicate over satellite, situational awareness like you wouldn't believe. But ultimately, if you got ground guys pinned down and an enemy in close proximity, sometimes you got to get in tight to help them and to help either egress from the situation or do what needs to get done so that my brothers could and the partnered forces they're working with can get back to their families. And ultimately that's what you take pride in, that you do the hard job, and that in the moment you're focused on getting the job done, and you don't let fear, you don't let emotion. You deal with that after you land, after those blades stop, and you look around, and all the high fives are done, and sunglasses are on, day or night. You can really you can just reflect on it after the fact that you contributed some good in the world, and with that great power of being in the aircraft, all those weapon systems I talked about, you also had to be surgical, because that's the type of war I was fighting, that you had to take that, extra time to analyze a situation. You had to, determine, is this just a set of coincidences that, make this person look like an adversary, or, is this person an adversary that needs to be dealt with? And so I think that I was always equipped with the rules of engagement, the timing to make those deliberate decisions when I had to. When I didn't, I felt like that was it was a very black and white circumstance, and that
that's
do what you had to do.
That's a interesting discussion to get into, is positive identification of the enemy, collateral damage, and how you determine who's bad and who's good in a combat environment. You will have had experiences as an armor officer in the fight, and then OD looking through forward-looking infrared, looking out the window, looking everywhere. You see muzzle flashes, and that's a clear indicator. But those indicators aren't always easy and black and white.
No, and one of the things that we tend to not talk about coming out of combat is that moral injuries are real injuries. That is primarily a lot of the, I think, guilt people come out of war zones carrying, is a lot of those situations where you maybe didn't make the right call and civilians got hurt because of that. I remember early on talking to several soldiers, or one NCO in particular, that he was a gate guard, and a 7-year-old kid comes walking up to his checkpoint, and the kid's got bombs strapped to his chest. And clearly this kid wasn't an insurgent or anything like that, but kind of the what we had been told, at least, is that oftentimes Al Qaeda would like kidnap family members, and then like make these family members go like put on a suicide vest if they want to see like their other family members that are being held hostage or being held captive be released or whatnot. So this 7-year-old kid comes walking up to his checkpoint with a bomb strapped to his chest, and the kid's crying and everything, but like there's a remote detonator on it. So like, what do you do? And this one soldier, or the NCO that I was talking to, he shot the kid and killed the kid because of it. But like, that was the right call. He saved the lives of all the soldiers at that checkpoint, as well as the civilians that were there. But that doesn't make it any easier, and that's something that he's going to have to carry with him for the rest of his life, right? That is a moral injury that he is going to hold, and there are many cases of that, especially coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, there's a lot of talk of the concept of fear in combat, right? You're scared for your life. You're scared for the lives of the people that are with you, but there's a lot of fear of doing the wrong thing, and when it comes to collateral damage or having to, an experience like the one you just described, doing the wrong thing in that situation, having a civilian be injured or killed, or having the wrong person be injured or killed, even if it's the right decision or within the ROI, there's real fear associated with that, because with a gun comes unbelievable power.
And then also we don't have perfect information, right? Like, there was, in our sector, there was a period of time where we were having a lot of special grenades thrown at us. These were Soviet basically styled grenades that had this like explosive shape charge on it. So they were really powerful, and they would actually penetrate the armor of a tank or of a up armored vehicle, whether a Humvee or what we were driving around, which were called MRAPs. They were incredibly damaging. We lost a bunch of soldiers to that. So there was a grenade threat, right? So we were driving through markets, and sometimes we'd have these grenades thrown at us. Sometimes people would throw rocks at us, right? And there were times when people made the wrong call, because you're just in that moment. You see somebody wind up, throw a large object at you. You think it's a grenade, and you shoot the guy. Sometimes those calls were wrong, but they were done, in those kind of moments of heightened fear, heightened sense of security, as well as kind of the fog of war where you don't have perfect information. Same thing with suicide VBIDs. We had about a 6-month spat where Al Qaeda was building a tremendous amount of suicide car bombs in Mosul, and we would just be driving down the road, and this car would, cars would come out of alleyways and go full speed at us, and then they would explode, and there would be a catastrophic event. We lost a lot of soldiers like that. Like how do you, again, like the problem was though in this fog of war, sometimes you would have civilian cars that just didn't like understand kind of the rules of engagement or like what the proper response would be when approaching a military convoy. And sometimes, again, it seems kind of crazy, but they would actually speed up because they were just kind of afraid or confused or didn't know what to do. And thinking that they're suicide VBIDs or suicide car bombs, soldiers engage them.
And when those engagements happen, it's not once the engagement happens in that kind of situation, there's no time to assess and make decisions once that's happening. Like in those situations, an engagement like that is a large volume of fire to stop the vehicle, because all of those soldiers in that situation have the image running through their mind of a Toyota Corolla pulling up and an entire platoon of them and all of their friends being blown to pieces. And that's this image that's going through these soldiers' heads at a checkpoint, that risk.
And again, that's how they're trained to respond. They're trained to do certain escalatory acts. You fire a warning shot, you fire a flare. If they are still approaching at a certain distance, you engage the vehicle. You shoot the engine block. If it continues, then you eliminate the threat. But again, I forget what the initial question was, but it's this idea of like moral injury.
Yeah, it's the fear of making those kinds of decisions and taking those kinds of actions, and then realizing after the fact that it was a civilian. It was someone throwing a rock, not a grenade. And even though the rules of engagement, your commanding officers, your squad leader, if you're a young private, tells you did everything right.
Yeah, it doesn't make it any easier. And I know a lot of people that suffer from PTSD, or what I think now is a better term is post-traumatic stress. It's not a disorder. We need to drop the D, because at the end of the day, everybody deals with post-traumatic stress going into a combat zone. But a lot of people's emotional turmoil that they're dealing with is because of many incidences like that. And there's also this sense of frustration or vulnerability in that we were never asked to go deploy to Iraq. Our country sent us to it. And to be put into those situations kind of against your will, like nobody ever wants to have to make those life and death decisions where innocent civilians get hurt. But there's just it's a lot of emotion.
There's a big difference.
Guilt to deal with.
Sure, there's a big difference between knowing what you're signing up for, right? Because I think that even making the decision as young as a high school senior, which for all intents and purposes is you're essentially just coming out of childhood, adolescence, making that decision, you still, in an army at war, there's an expectation to some extent that you know what you're getting into. You're signing up to join the military. You're going to have a weapon placed in your hands. That's part of the deal, especially choosing armor, aviation, and or infantry. Choosing those kinds of paths. But knowing what you're getting into in that regard, there's no way to understand ahead of time the depths and the complex decision making that has to happen in a split second in those environments. And then I don't think very many people join the military knowing how taking another human being's life or participating in an operation that had a collateral damage effect or a civilian casualty. There's a difference in knowing what you're signing up for and knowing how you're going to be able to handle a situation like that.
It's naivete. I mean, you have the world we grew up in, Hollywood that we grew up paying attention to, has a certain glorification of it's easy to pick apart, to watch Saving Private Ryan, to watch Band of Brothers, and to look at the whether it's the positive aspects of leadership or the
their decision-making process.
or leading men in combat. I mean, being someone in charge who is forced to make tough decisions. But I mean, even our parents. The Vietnam generation was influenced by a lot of the media around that time too. I think there's and stories from propaganda that was put forth in World War II that there's naivete with the decision that you make in a lot of cases. You look at how is this going to benefit me? You don't look at some of the ramifications of it. And I think it's that's what it's the importance of having these discussions is sometimes unpleasant as they might be, that is important to share with our countrymen, to share with the world that it's not all roses and sunshine and
it's not all
medals.
killing the enemy and high fives afterwards.
Good guys don't always win, and bad guys don't always lose. I mean, it's the conflict of and why it's important to understand the real world ramifications that have on your young men and women when you ask them to deploy and fight in a war. And I think these are the stories that need to be told.
Yeah. I mean, General Sherman said war is hell, right? And that hasn't changed, despite how much we've integrated technology and satellite intelligence and UAVs on the battlefield and increased the precision through GPS guided munitions. At the end of the day, war is still hell. It's messy, and what we intend doesn't always happen on the battlefield.
And on the other side of the coin, the military and the environment, that professional environment, those intense experiences also have an incredibly profound effect on the people that experience them, both positive and negative. I think that all of us can very clearly articulate how experiences in the military have made you a more professional person, a better person, have given you experiences and friends that you'll value for the rest of your life, while also putting you in situations that are extremely difficult physically, emotionally, professionally, that many folks after their time in the military have difficulty dealing with.
I think that's that. The war doesn't end just because you're back on your home soil. It doesn't. I mean, history and our society is replete with examples of both positive and negative situations where that reintegration process has gone well or hasn't. And I think that's why I know we take times like this to get together and sit down and drink a couple beers and talk through these experiences. Are all coping in some capacity to process and support one another, and I'm thankful for it. I love you guys. You guys are special to me, and having shared that experience, even that decision that we made as young high school seniors to do this, and we didn't understand the ramifications of everything, but
and difficult situations notwithstanding, the military's professional development process and the way that they train leaders and put people into leadership positions at a very young age is incredibly developmental, and has unbelievable positive effects. And so, contrary to war is hell, the military is also an unbelievable environment for developing as a young adult and gaining the kinds of qualities that make people or contribute to success over the long term. So
and then also at the end of the day, like, we're doing this podcast, Mike, and I am thankful and appreciative that you are giving people an opportunity to tell their stories, because, like you said, this is an important aspect of not only us as an individual, but also I think us as a country kind of healing through what we have kind of embarked on through the last 17 years of warfare now. I saw in your car today you have Sebastian Junger's book Tribes, and I think a big part of that is that at least Sebastian Younger's idea is that one of the reasons that veterans today are suffering PTS, post-traumatic stress, at such high rates is because we as a society have not really given them kind of this opportunity of embracing them and allowing them to tell their stories. You look back at generations previous in World War I and World War II, where the majority, or not necessarily the majority, but a large portion of your population served in the military. They saw, really terrible things in warfare, but when they came home, they had people within their community that also served beside them that they could kind of share those experiences with, whether that was through the American Legion or the VFW. But society as a whole embraced that population coming back, and that population of veterans felt understood. They felt that people got what they just went through. That's a very different concept today, where less than 1% of the country serves in the military. And I'm not making any statement about that. I think that's a good thing that we don't have to have a large portion of our military serve. But one of the negative consequences of that fact is that when a veteran returns home today, they get out of the service in a pretty quick transition. They go to their hometown, and literally they're the only ones that have served in the military, had gone to Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's very difficult for them, that they don't feel like they are part of, to Sebastian Younger's point of his book, they don't feel like they're a part of a tribe. And that's kind of a human instinctual need, is to feel belonging within a tribe. And so because that they don't have this group that they can kind of get these things off their chest, tell their story, feel like people get them, they then internalize a lot of these problems, and that comes out through a lot of the negative consequences of post-traumatic stress. So, I think that it's very important for veterans to tell their story. I think it's very important for our country to ask veterans about their experiences. I think that when it comes to, we talked about moral injury, when it comes to moral guilt associated with warfare, I think that's a burden that veterans shouldn't be the only ones to carry on their shoulders. That's something that we as a democratic country need to share that burden equally. And I see your podcast as kind of another aspect of that issue, and being able to give voice, tell the story, and us as a country to really understand the nature of what we as a country kind of voted and chose to do through the most recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end episode 1 of Fear and Glory, Stories of Service. The podcast where we're really trying to tell these stories, to be able to allow people to have some insight and maybe better relate, or to hear a story that they find impactful, or to understand a little bit about what's going on in a small population here in the United States. And that's also a perfect lead in. Something that we're doing on every episode of the podcast is that we're going to highlight a nonprofit that supports the community of either military, law enforcement, or first responders. And something that you brought up about, someone returning home and being the only person in their community that served. The one nonprofit that's out there that I've seen, there are many nonprofits that are in this area that do amazing things, but Team Red, White, and Blue is a nonprofit whose mission is to connect veterans and with their communities through physical fitness and social activities. And simply put, what they do is organize events that bring veterans that live in a community, cities across the world, together with people that civilians, veterans, people that have lived in that community for a long time, and it connects those folks coming back or getting out of the service to those communities. It gets them involved in things like physical fitness activities, anything from a 5K, organized group runs, CrossFit workouts, you name it. And I think that kind of activity and connecting those people together in that group environment really fosters those kinds of conversations that you're talking about. Is anyone in the country, anyone in the world really can go to teamrwb.org, sign up, find the closest chapter to them. There's one in every major city in America, and join. They'll get an email from a chapter captain who says, "Hey, our next group run is next week or whatever it is. And that's a perfect opportunity. It's a low barrier to entry. You can sign up and join your chapter. There's, no cost associated, but the great thing about it is that it does a great job of removing that loneliness when you come back to a group of friends maybe from high school that just you no longer have shared experiences, because the most formative things that have recently happened to this person coming home are just so different than all of their peer group. So Team Red, White, and Blue, and found at teamrwb.org is a nonprofit that's out there that's really found an amazing solution and an amazing method for connecting those people and allowing folks to hear individual stories from people who live right next door to them, who serve. So I think that's an amazing organization, and it's definitely something worth checking out. So
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Michael.
Thanks. Thanks for putting the mic on. Thanks for listening to the first episode of Fear and Courage. Our next couple of episodes include more Global War on Terror service members, Special Operations warriors, and next week I'll interview a friend and local paramedic.